Welcome back to the third and final part of this series on soil testing for homegrown vegetables. In today's video, I'm continuing my conversation with Jack Legg, an agronomist with SGS, my local soil testing lab, where I sent my soil to be tested. In this episode, we're talking about my food forest soil, which is really exciting to me. And I'll get into more detail soon in this video about how that soil was developed by me over time. I'm really excited to hear the findings of this soil report because this is a method that I advise people to use all the time when you're trying to combat weeds and you want to plant perennials or fruit trees, any food forest plants. I always advise this method of building soil over time. And today we're going to find out how effective that actually can be. We're also going to wrap up this lengthy interview with Jack by talking about when and how to test your soil, going into a bit more detail on that. And also, we're going to talk about compost, using compost in the garden, either to top dress or to plant directly into. We're going to hear all kinds of information, the pros and cons, the benefit, the detriment to using compost in the vegetable garden. And without further ado, please enjoy part 3 of this series. We want to dive right into the food forest soil test?
Sure. And yeah, I don't recall how similar or different it is. So we'll go through it together.
All right. So this is the food forest. And I can just explain briefly how the food forest was made. 4 years ago, it was lawn that was covered in bindweed. And I didn't want that infiltrating where I was going to grow things. So I laid down double sheets of plain cardboard. And then I brought in about 8 to 12 inches in some places, but mostly like 8 inches of wood chips from arborists in the area. Topped that. And I dug some holes through the wood chips to plant some fruit trees early on. And otherwise, I just waited for 3 years for everything to start decomposing. And now I've planted a bunch of just native, perennial plants in that space. And so to take the soil test, I scraped residual wood chips aside so I could get to more of what had decomposed, get to the soil that the wood chips had made to submit for the test. But it is still very woody, and I'm really curious to know what the findings were from these tests.
Okay, so yeah, that's a good history on this soil because it's not a native soil. It's one that you've been working on creating and improving. I think I would say that over time, your soil will continue to improve. Especially because it has those woody components that you acknowledged. So anything like bark chips, sawdust, those woody type things are a very good source of organic carbon and essentially organic matter. However, because they have a very high carbon ratio compared to nitrogen, then the process that decomposes it by the soil microbiology needs a certain amount of nitrogen to do so. So what happens is they take nitrogen out of the mineral soil to help them decompose the carbon in the wood products. And what it eventually does is we call it immobilization. It's tying up soil nitrogen, which will eventually be re-released. But in short, it's somewhat robbing the nitrogen from the soil to decompose the wood. So adding additional nitrogen through fertilizer will help with that. And that's why things like manure and straw are an okay amendment that don't tie up. So it all depends on that C to N ratio. So animal manure might have a C to N of, say, 15. Sawdust is closer to 200. Where something like wheat straw is 80. So it's almost perfectly balanced in wheat straw that it's not robbing any nitrogen, but it's not providing any either. Manure with the lower C to N ratio is providing nitrogen. And then on the high end of the scale, 200 with sawdust and wood chips, they are robbing nitrogen that will eventually be released. But as those things decompose, they'll make a very organic soil. And you can see with your organic matter of 26%, you're already quite high. That's similar to like a black muck native soil, which isn't bad. Yeah. So and the pH isn't as high as I would have expected. So 7.7, that's reasonable. And just going across again, we won't go through each one individually, but the phosphorus of 60 is great. 180. It's almost the same potassium as your raised beds. Your magnesium is double, so that's perfect. Calcium's right in range, and so is the zinc and manganese. So all in all, I'd say you're doing a good job there.
Yeah. Is there anything else from this test that you wanted to?
Nothing else jumps out there. Now, this is, I'll just point out that this is a different package that we selected. Every lab will offer a different suite of packages or tests. It depends on what you want to manage. If you're never going to fertilize for copper or boron or iron, then you could probably have a less expensive test package because you're not going to do that anyways. Or what I might suggest to folks, if you have a new planting, so say something that's more permanent, raspberries or blueberries or fruit trees, so pre-plant on something that's permanent or a new soil to you or something you've never had a soil test on, go with the more thorough package to check everything. And then if the micronutrients, for example, look good, then the next time around when you're soil testing, you can get away with a less expensive test package because they're not they're probably not going to change that much over a few years.
Yeah, it wasn't expensive either. The more thorough package I paid just over $60 for. And if you're thinking of putting in, half a dozen blueberry bushes, you're spending hundreds of dollars on plants, and you want to make sure that you're not going to waste that money.
And some crops, it's a lot of physical labor. Planting garlic by hand, transplanting potted blueberries on a large enough plantation. I mean, it's backbreaking. So you want to make sure the soil is adequate before you go through all that effort. And the soil test, you're right. Most soil test packages range from say $25 to $60. In the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty small investment. Fertility doesn't change that much over time, that you could get away with every 3 years by doing soil testing. It's not something you need to monitor every year. It's probably going to be fairly consistent, unless you're doing something dramatic to try to change. For example, if you're trying to raise pH or lower pH, then it might be worthwhile to do a test the following year to see what your management has done to impact that pH.
Yeah.
But by and large, every few years, it's a fairly small investment.
Yeah, I agree. At first, I thought years ago, this is too much to invest in my garden space right now. And now that I've done it, it doesn't seem like too much. The information that it gives, even though I didn't have to make any changes, it's just really reassuring also. And if I see issues with my plants, I know it's not because of this, not because of this, not because of this. And then I can do a process of deduction and figure out what actually is going on.
Yeah, and then as you collect, because most gardeners are very long-term anyways, they want to do this over many years. As you collect different years worth of data, then you can start to see trends. Are you increasing fertility? Are you depleting it? Or just maintaining, which is the ultimate goal, is to get to a point where fertility is adequate and then keep it there.
Yeah.
So that can be determined by the soil test as well.
So let's talk about compost. Can we talk about compost now?
Yes, of course.
This is an exciting one for me. I'm going to preface it by saying that in the gardening world, I would say things are trending toward the no dig, which is made famous by Charles Dowding, the UK market gardener and author, and on YouTube, where the whole idea is just compost, compost, compost. You just plant directly into the compost. You create beds completely out of compost. And I think in the UK, they may have a slightly different idea of what compost is. But, I've heard it referred to as the green waste. So municipalities will ship back that compost and you can use it on your beds. And I'm really interested to hear from an agronomist what your perspective is on using so much compost in the garden.
Right. So what I would say is that every compost is different. So in some cases, growing directly into a compost might be the best thing you can do. But with other composts, they might be so overly rich that they'll cause nothing but problems. It might also depend on the plants you're growing. Tomatoes are fairly robust. It's hard to kill a tomato plant. You can even see seedlings pop up from compost that had tomato seedlings in it from years previous, right? However, there's other plants that are a little less hardy that might be problematic. So keeping in mind moderation. If a doctor told us to take a vitamin B pill every morning, we wouldn't take the whole bottle. And sometimes growing directly into compost is like taking the whole bottle. It's just so much of a good thing, it overwhelms the system. We have to be careful not to over apply many things. I've seen examples where we've had a test come in and the grower would say, well, my garden productivity is declining. And I would show them results that are very, very high, excessively high. And I'd ask, what are you putting on your soil? And they say, well, all the good stuff, everything from coffee grinds to fire pit ashes, leaf compost, municipal compost. And they're throwing so many things at it, trying to do the right thing, that all of a sudden it's not even a soil anymore. It's just a mixture of super rich things that that can't sustain plant growth. And the other thing we should recognize is that the soil itself, the mineral soil, is full of other things that are beneficial. It's an ecosystem of its own. Bacteria, fungi, most of them beneficial. There are some problematic fungi, but most of them are beneficial to plant growth and plant nutrition. And science is only just understanding more and more all the time about how some fungi might interact with roots to help translocate nutrients into the plant. So all these things are good, but they also need to be fairly balanced and have an environment where they can thrive. And if we're overwhelming it with other ingredients, then sometimes that part doesn't work as well. So in general, compost is a good thing. Moderation is always advised. And if you consider, a 1-inch application on top of the soil and worked in 6 inches deep, that's probably quite a lot. We definitely don't want to put on, inches and inches on top and work it in. And I wouldn't advise growing directly into compost unless we had a test to show that it was at low enough salt and nutrient levels that it would sustain plant growth.
Okay. And how does all this salt end up in the compost? Where is it coming from?
Well, we use salt as a general term. We tend to think about salt as sodium chloride, like in a salt shaker on our table. And yes, sodium chloride is a salt, but technically any combination of a positive and negative, like a sodium and a chloride, can be a salt. So potassium chloride is also a salt. There's also the influence of other nutrients on the total salt measurement. So ammonium is a plant nutrient. Potassium is a plant nutrient, but they can have a certain burn factor to them. So when we talk about salts, we don't mean that somebody has just added sodium chloride to the compost, but leaf and yard waste, for example, might have de-icing salt on the leaves from roadways or from sidewalks. Concentrated amounts of vegetable waste might have salt in it, like true sodium chloride salt from cooking scraps, but it also, because you're concentrating all those high density things, carrots and lettuce and everything else that has all these nutrients in it, there's a certain amount of sodium in there as well. So the more we can make a mature compost, the more water naturally leaches those salts away, the better. And yeah, it's not just sea salt or pool salt or de-icing salt. It's the salty ions that have a burn effect that we want to minimize.
Okay. So just this last fall, 1 year ago, we built a compost system that's 3 bays. There is concrete slab underneath it because it's rodent proof because we're in the suburbs. And I add our vegetable scraps. I add my chicken bedding. I add some wood chips when I have them. And I also go along the street in the fall with a tarp and I take everybody's leaves off the road and I go and put them in my compost bin. So I think when my first bay is mature in the spring, I'm going to send in a sample to test for salts because I'm very curious now that I'm thinking about all of the stuff I've put in there to make this compost. I would love to know actually the salts that are in there.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And we can do a fairly general package that just shows you how much phosphorus and potassium are there as well. So it gives you a better idea of how much to add to the soil, so you're not over applying, but you're also meeting the needs of your plants.
Yeah. So I generally don't like to oversimplify information, but if you could wrap everything you've taught me today up into like one hot tip or just a helpful statement that can give backyard food growers just a little bit more information to help them improve their soil, what might you say?
I think first off, patience. Many people are looking for that silver bullet. What can I add that's going to make everything grow spectacular? Well, there isn't one, but be patient, because it does take time. And if you do too much all at once, then you might have adverse effects. So I would say patience. I'd also say moderation. Don't overdo anything. If you think that adding a municipal compost is a good thing, well, try out a little bit. Don't do too much. We do want to keep things in balance. So patience and moderation would be the two things I'd say, and enjoy and be prepared for failures as well as successes. Like I say, as a gardener myself, there's nothing better than going out and picking your dinner out of the garden, whether it's beets or peas or beans. But there's also nothing more heartbreaking than seeing, you might have a year where you've started tomatoes in the winter and you've cared for them, you've planted, you've weeded, you've watered, and then you get a blight that takes them all out. It can be traumatic, but that also makes it more rewarding in the end when you are providing food for yourself. And lastly, I'd say I wish everybody would try to grow their own food to see how difficult it is to put food on the table and into our mouths, but also how rewarding it is when you can do so. And it just tastes better when it's coming right from the garden onto your plate.
I couldn't agree more. Wow, I think I could talk with you about growing food and about soil for hours and hours and hours. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk and to educate me, and for all the other people who are going to watch this video. I think this has got some really helpful information in it for people trying to grow their own food, for people trying to garden in any way. And thank you so much for taking the time, Jack.
Excellent. It was a pleasure, Amy. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for watching this series. I hope you enjoyed. I hope that you learned a thing or two about soil, the micronutrients, the macronutrients, all the benefits to test your soil. I know I learned a ton from my conversation with Jack, and I think that soil testing is now something I'm going to do every 3 years just to make sure that my soil is on track. If this series has taught you anything really notable, I would love to hear it in the comments. Please let me know what you learned from Jack from this conversation. I think this series has given us a lot to think about over kind of boring and dark winter months when we're not as actively growing out in the gardens. And hopefully it's given you some information that you can take with you into the spring garden as you're planning your setup for the coming year. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you'll come and grow with us.